Casey Miller sat in the back row of the classroom staring at numbers that made no sense to her. The tall, silver-haired alien teacher moved around the front of the room, drawing symbols in the air with her long fingers. Each symbol glowed blue for a moment before fading away. The teacher was from a race called Etherians, and her name was Professor Velteron. She looked like the elves from old Earth stories, but taller and more graceful. Her voice was soft and musical when she spoke about physics and math. Casey tried to follow along, but the words might as well have been in an alien language. Well, they were in an alien language, but the translation device in her ear was supposed to help with that. The problem was not the words themselves, but what they meant. Around her sat students from 12 different worlds. The Zephyrians had large heads and could remember everything they ever learned. The blue-skinned Condorians could share thoughts with each other. The rock-like Storians never forgot anything they studied. All of them seemed to understand what Professor Velteron was teaching. Casey felt like she was drowning in a sea of knowledge that everyone else could swim through easily. The lesson was about something called quantum field theory. Casey had looked it up before class, but reading about it only made her more confused. The textbook talked about particles that could be in two places at once, and forces that worked backwards through time. Professor Velteron stopped drawing symbols and looked around the room. Her large purple eyes seemed to glow with inner light when she smiled. Her whole face lit up like starlight. Today, we will have a small test on the material we covered this week, she said in her musical voice. Please prepare your answer. Tablets. Casey felt her stomach drop. She had studied for hours, but nothing stuck in her mind. The way these aliens learned was so different from how her brain worked. Back on Earth, she had been good at fixing things and working with her hands, but here everything was theory and equations. The test appeared on the tablet in front of her. 20 questions about particle physics and energy fields. Casey read the first question 3 times and still did not understand what it was asking. She looked around at her classmates. The Zephyrian next to her was already halfway done, his large head tilted in concentration. The Condorian pair across the aisle seemed to be sharing the test somehow, working together with their linked minds. Casey picked random answers for most questions on a few. She tried to work out the math, but her calculations looked nothing like what she remembered from the study sessions. She finished early, not because she was smart, but because she had given up. When Professor Velteron collected the tablets, Casey handed hers over with a feeling of dread. She knew without checking that she had failed again. This would be her 7th failed test in 8 weeks. After class, Casey walked slowly through the halls of the research ship New Horizons. The ship was huge, with sections for each of the different alien races. Living areas were designed for different gravity levels and atmospheres. The human section felt small compared to the others she passed. Groups of students talking in excited voices about the lesson. Some spoke in languages her translator could not handle, making strange clicking and humming sounds. They all seemed so confident, so sure of themselves. Casey reached her room and found her roommate Zara Thompson sitting at her desk working on language assignments. Zara was everything Casey was not. She spoke 4 alien languages fluently and had perfect scores in every class. Hey, Casey, how did the test go? Zara asked, without looking up from her work. Casey flopped onto her bed and stared at the ceiling. The room had a window that showed the stars rushing past as the ship traveled between worlds. Sometimes Casey wished she could just step out into space and float away. About as well as usual, Casey said. Zara finally looked up. Her dark hair was tied back, and she wore the serious expression she got when she was worried. That bad Howers probably. Casey turned on her side to face her roommate. I do not understand how you make it look so easy. Zara closed her language book and turned her chair around. It's not easy for me either. I just study differently. Maybe I could help you with the next test. Casey had heard this offer before. Zara meant well, but she learned the same way the aliens did, by memorizing facts and understanding complex theories. Casey's brain just did not work that way. Thanks, but I think I need to figure this out myself, Casey said she knew. Zara wanted to help, but every tutoring session just made Casey feel worse about herself. When Zara explained physics, it sounded simple and logical, When Casey tried to do the same problems, her mind went blank later. That evening Casey walked to the observation deck. The huge window showed space in all directions. Stars and nebulae painted the darkness in colors that had no names. The sight usually made her feel better, but tonight it just reminded her how far she was from home and Earth. Casey had worked on her family's ranch. She could fix any machine and handle animals that others feared. She understood the land and the weather in ways that felt natural and right. Here in space, surrounded by genius aliens, she felt lost. A group of Zephyrian students stood near the window, talking in their rapid clicking language. Casey did not need a translator to know they were discussing her. She had become famous on the ship, but not in a good way though. Other students called her the human who failed everything. Some said it quietly, but others were not so kind. The Zephyrians especially seemed confused by her. They could not understand how someone could be so bad at learning. Casey moved to a different part of the observation deck, but she could still hear them. One of them said something that made the others laugh. She did not need to understand their language to know it was about Hera. Soft voice behind her said Casey. She turned to see Dr. Lyra Starweaver, the Etherean teaching assistant. Lyra was younger than Professor Velteron, but still ancient by human standards. Her silver hair was shorter, and her purple eyes held a kind expression. I wanted to talk to you about your test results, Lyra said gently. Casey nodded. She had been expecting this conversation. Dr. Lyra had been trying to help her for weeks, offering extra study sessions and simplified materials. Nothing had worked. Your score was 12%, Lyra continued. I know you are trying, but perhaps we need a different approach. Casey felt heat rise in her cheeks. 12% was worse than random guessing. She had actually done worse than if she had just picked answers without reading the questions. I do not think tutoring will help, Casey said. I am just not smart enough for this program. Lyra stepped closer, her expression serious. Intelligence comes in many forms, Casey. Just because you struggle with theoretical physics does not mean you lack intelligence. The words were kind, but Casey had heard them before. Every teacher who had tried to help her said the same thing. They meant well, but the results spoke for themselves. 7 failed tests in 8 weeks. Was not just bad luck. Maybe I should just go home, Casey said, looking back out at the stars. Before Lyra could respond, an announcement echoed through the ship. All students and faculty report to your stations. We are approaching Kepler 44b for research operations. Casey had read about Kepler 44b in the mission briefings. It was a newly discovered world, with strange plants and animals. The research expedition would let students study alien life forms up close. As the other students hurried away to prepare for the expedition, Casey remained at the window. She wondered if she would even be allowed to join the research team after failing so many tests. Maybe they would leave her on the ship. Dyra stayed beside her for a moment longer. Sometimes, Casey, the most important tests happen outside the classroom, she said. Before walking away, Casey watched the planet grow larger in the window. It looked green and blue like Earth, but with swirling cloud patterns she had never seen. The sight filled her with something she had not felt in weeks. Hope. Maybe on the surface of an alien world she could find a way to prove she belonged. Her Evan. If she could not solve physics equations, maybe she could do something useful. Maybe she could show everyone, including herself, that there was more than one way to be smart. The shuttle landed on Kepler 44b with a soft thud that Casey felt through the metal floor. She looked out the small window at an alien world that took her breath away. Trees made of what looked like crystal stretched toward to suns. In the sky, their branches caught the light and threw rainbows across the landscape. Casey had never seen anything so beautiful. The grass was purple and moved like water in the gentle breeze. Flowers that glowed with their own light dotted the meadows. Small flying creatures that looked like jellyfish drifted through the air, leaving trails of sparkles behind. Then Professor Velteron stood at the front of the shuttle holding a list of assignments. She looked even more graceful here in the natural light. Her silver hair seemed to glow, and her purple eyes reflected the alien landscape. Students will work in assigned areas, she announced in her musical voice. Stay within the safety perimeter and report any unusual findings. Casey Miller, UR, assigned to Botanical Collection in Sector 7. Casey felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Relief, because she would not have to work with the other students, who made her feel stupid. Disappointment, because Sector 7 was the furthest from the interesting discoveries the others would surely make. Lyra approached Casey with a collection kit and scanner. The kit contained sample containers, preservation fluids, and tools for taking measurements. Lyra showed Casey how to use each item, though most were simple enough that even Casey could figure them out. Remember to record everything you observe, Lyra said kindly. Even small details might be important to our research. Casey nodded and slung the kit over her shoulder. The weight felt good against her back. It reminded her of the tool bags she carried when helping fix things on the ranch. Finally, she had something to do that did not require solving equations. The other students spread out across the landing area in groups. Casey watched them go, feeling a familiar ache of loneliness. The Zephyrians moved together like a small army, their large heads turning in unison as they scanned for interesting specimens. The Kondurians seemed to flow across the landscape, sharing information through their mental link. Casey walked toward Sector 7, which was at the edge of a crystal forest. The trees here were smaller, and the light filtering through them created patterns on the ground. She knelt beside a cluster of blue flowers and carefully took her first sample. For the first time in months, Casey felt useful. The work was simple, but important. She measured each plant, recorded its location, and noted how it responded to touch. Some flowers closed when she approached, others seemed to lean toward her, as if curious about this strange visitor. The alien plants were unlike anything on Earth, but the basic work felt familiar. Casey had spent countless hours in her mother's garden, learning to identify plants and understand what they needed. She had the same gentle touch here that had helped her with earth flowers. As she worked, Casey began to notice patterns in how the plants grew. The crystal trees seemed to provide some kind of energy to the smaller plants. The glowing flowers were always found near the base of the largest trees. The purple grass grew in spirals around certain rock formations. None of this required advanced mathematics or physics theory. It was observation and pattern recognition skills Casey had developed. Over years of working outdoors, she found herself relaxing for the first time since joining the research program. The twin suns moved across the sky as Casey filled her sample containers. She had covered most of Sector 7 and felt proud of her careful work. Each sample was properly labeled and preserved according to the protocols Dr. Lyra had taught her. Casey was examining a particularly interesting vine when the ground began to shake. At first, she thought it might be some kind of earthquake. The crystal trees around her chimed softly as they swayed. The sound was beautiful, but there was something wrong about the rhythm. The shaking grew stronger. Casey stood up and looked around, trying to identify the source through the crystal forest. She could see the other research teams in the distance. They seemed to have noticed the disturbance too. Several students were pointing toward the deeper forest. Then Casey heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was a roar that seemed to come from the earth itself, deep and powerful and full of rage. The crystal trees picked up the sound and amplified it, creating an echo that rolled across the landscape like thunder. Something large was moving through the forest toward the research site. Casey could see the crystal trees bending and breaking as whatever it was pushed through them. The other students had stopped their work and were backing toward the shuttle. Professor Veltarin was speaking rapidly into her communication device, probably calling for emergency extraction, but Casey could see from her expression that something was wrong. The device was not working properly through the crystal trees. Casey caught her first glimpse of the creature, and her heart nearly stopped. It was massive, easily 3 times her height, and covered in thick armor plating. Its head was like a cross between a bear and a dinosaur, with jaws that could crush metal. The beast moved with surprising speed for something so large. Its massive claws dug furrows in the alien soil as it charged toward the research team. Casey realized with growing horror that Sector 7 put her directly between the creature and the other students. The alien beast burst from the crystal forest, and Casey got her first clear look at it. The thing was enormous, at least 400 kilograms of muscle and fury. Its hide was dark green with patches of natural armor. Its eyes glowed red with predatory intelligence. Case had grown up around dangerous animals. Bulls that could kill with one kick, horses that could crush a person against a fence, wild animals that wandered onto the ranch looking for food. But this creature was beyond anything she had ever faced. The beast seemed to be tracking something, and Casey realized with sick certainty what it was hunting. The research team had disturbed something, perhaps. The creature's territory or food source now. It was looking for the source of that disturbance. Casey could see the other students clearly. Now, they were running toward the shuttle, but they would never make it in time. The creature was too fast, and they were too far away. Several students had fallen in their panic. The Zephyrians with their large heads were having trouble moving quickly. The Kandurians seemed confused without their usual group coordination. Lyra was trying to help a student who had twisted her ankle. Professor Velteron was still struggling with the communication device. The emergency beacon was flashing red, but no signal was getting through the planetary interference. The beast fixed its glowing red eyes on the research group and let out another roar that shook the ground. Casey felt the sound in her bones. It was the roar of a predator that had found its prey. Casey looked at her sample kit, then at the creature, then at her fellow students who were about to die. She had failed every test in the classroom, but this was not a classroom. This was real life, and real life did not care about physics equations. The creature began its final charge. Its massive form thundered across the alien landscape, heading straight for Dr. Lyra and the injured student. Casey had maybe 30 seconds to act for. The first time since arriving on the research ship, Casey Miller stopped thinking about what she could not do and started thinking about what she could do. Time seemed to slow down as the massive beast charged toward Dr. Lyra and the injured student. Casey could see every detail with crystal clarity. The way the creature's left leg favored its right, suggesting an old injury, the slight wobble in its charge that meant its momentum was not perfectly balanced, the exact angle it would need to take to reach its targets. While her classmates screamed and scattered, Casey felt something wake up inside her. It was not panic or fear, but a cold, calculating part of her mind that had been shaped by years of handling dangerous situations on the ranch. Casey had wrestled bulls that weighed twice what she did. She had faced down wild dogs that threatened the livestock. She had climbed into pens with angry horses and somehow convinced them to trust her. This creature was bigger and more dangerous, but the principles were the same. The beast was maybe 20 meters away from Dr. Lyra. When Casey started moving, she did not run toward the shuttle like everyone else. Instead, she ran toward the creature, angling to intercept its path. Casey could hear Professor Velteron shouting something in her musical language, probably telling Casey to get back to safety. The other students were staring at her with expressions of horror and disbelief. Why was the human running toward certain death? But Casey was not running toward death. She was running toward a solution. Her mind was already working out. The creature weighed about 400 kilograms and was moving at roughly 30 kilometers per hour. That gave it tremendous momentum, but momentum could be redirected if you knew how. The beast noticed Casey at the last moment, its red eyes fixed on this new threat, and for a split second, it seemed confused. This tiny creature was running toward it, instead of a way that was not normal prey behavior. Casey reached the interception point just as the creature arrived. She could smell its alien musk and feel the heat radiating from its massive body. Up close, it was even more terrifying than she had imagined, but terror was a luxury she could not afford right now. As the beast lunged toward her, Casey did something that would have made her physics professors weep with joy if they could have understood what they were seeing. She applied every principle of leverage, momentum, and biomechanics that she had learned not from textbooks, but from a lifetime of working with large, dangerous animals. Casey sidestepped at the exact moment when the creature's momentum made it impossible to change direction. She grabbed what looked like a natural ridge in its armored hide, using it as a grip point. Then she did something that defied the expectations of every alien observer, present using the creature's own forward momentum against it. Casey planted her feet and twisted her entire body. She had done this move 1,000 times with cattle that tried to charge past her on the ranch. The principle was simple: redirect the force, instead of fighting against it. What happened next would be analyzed and discussed in alien academic circles for years to come. Casey Miller, the human who failed every physics exam, lifted a 400-kilogram alien predator off the ground and threw it sideways away from Dr. Lyra and the injured student. The beast flew through the air for several meters before crashing into a cluster of crystal trees. The impact sent rainbow shards flying in all directions. The creature landed hard, but not fatally injured. It shook its massive head, seeming more stunned than hurt for a moment. The entire research site was silent, except for the gentle chiming of the damaged crystal trees. Even the injured student stopped crying. The beast slowly got to its feet and looked around as if trying to understand what had just happened. Casey stood between the creature and the research team, breathing hard, but ready to act again, if necessary. She could feel adrenaline coursing through her system, but her mind remained calm and focused. This was what she was good at: reading animal behavior and responding appropriately. The beast stared at Casey for a long moment, its red eyes now showing something that might have been respect. It let out a lower, softer sound than its previous roars. This was not the call of a predator, but of an animal that was reassessing the situation. Casey slowly backed toward the research team, keeping her eyes on the creature. She knew from experience that turning your back on a dangerous animal was often a mistake, but she also knew that showing too much aggression could restart the confrontation. The beast watched her retreat, then seemed to make a decision. It turned away from the research site and walked back toward the crystal forest, moving with the dignity of a predator that had chosen discretion over continued conflict. Only when the creature disappeared into the trees did Casey allow herself to relax. She turned to check on Dr. Lyra and the injured student. Both were staring at her with expressions of complete amazement. "How did you do that, Dr. Lyra?" whispered her musical voice filled with wonder. Casey shrugged, feeling suddenly embarrassed by all the attention back home. "We have animals that can hurt you if you do not know how to handle them. You learn to use their size against them." Professor Velteron approached with her communication device, finally working. The emergency extraction would arrive soon, but she seemed more interested in Casey than in calling for help. "I have studied physics for 300 years, the professor said in her elegant voice. "I understand the mathematical principles of what you just accomplished, but I do not understand how you calculated the necessary forces so quickly." Casey looked at the professor with confusion. "I did not calculate anything, I just knew what would work." The other students were gathering around now, their earlier panic replaced by curiosity and amazement. The Zephyrians were speaking rapidly in their clicking language, probably trying to analyze what they had witnessed. The Condurians seemed to be sharing thoughts about the event through their mental links. Sarah Thompson, Casey's roommate, pushed through the crowd and grabbed her in a fierce hug. "I cannot believe you just did that," she said. "You saved their lives." Casey felt heat rising in her cheeks. She had not thought about saving lives or being heroic. She had simply seen a problem and solved it the way she would solve any practical problem. The emergency shuttle arrived 30 minutes later, but the conversation on the flight back to the research ship was entirely focused on Casey and what she had done. Several students had recorded the event on their personal devices, and the footage was already spreading through the ship's computer network as they approached the new horizons. Casey looked out at the research ship and felt something she had not experienced since arriving. There she felt like she belonged, like she had something valuable to contribute, even if it was not what anyone expected. Darlyra sat beside her during the flight, studying Casey with new interest. "I think we need to reconsider how we measure intelligence," she said quietly. "What you did required split-second analysis of multiple variables and perfect execution under extreme pressure." Casey nodded. But she was thinking about something else for the first time since failing her 7th physics test. She was not thinking about going home. Instead, she was wondering what other problems might need the kind of solutions that did not come from textbooks. The ship grew larger in the viewport, and Casey realized that everything was about to change. The human who failed every exam had just passed the most important test of all. The security footage played for the 5th time in the faculty conference room. Professor Veltarin paused the video at the moment. Casey grabbed the charging beast and looked around the table at her colleagues. The room held representatives from 8 different species, all experts in education and psychology. How is this possible? Asked Dr. Corvash, a Zephyrian, whose enlarged cranium housed one of the most powerful minds in known space. According to her test scores, this human should barely understand basic physics, yet she performed calculations that would challenge our best students. The video continued showing Casey redirecting 400 kilograms of alien predator with what appeared to be effortless precision. The math involved in that split-second decision was staggering. Multiple variables processed instantly under life-threatening pressure. Dr. Lyra Starweaver stood at the front of the room with a presentation she had prepared overnight. Since the incident on Kepler she had been researching human cognitive patterns with an intensity that surprised even her. I believe we have been measuring intelligence incorrectly, she announced. The room filled with skeptical murmurs. Ethereans had developed the current testing system over thousands of years. It evaluated logical reasoning, pattern recognition, and theoretical understanding. The system had worked perfectly for every species they had encountered, until now. Dr. Lyra activated a holographic display, showing brain scan data. This is Casey Miller during a standard physics exam, she explained. The areas associated with abstract reasoning show minimal activity. She appears to be struggling with concepts that should be elementary. The display changed to show a different scan. This is the same human during the creature encounter. The hologram lit up like a constellation, showing activity in regions. The aliens had never considered important spatial processing, kinesthetic intelligence, pattern recognition. Through physical movement, the human brain is processing information, but not in the way our tests measure. Dr. Lyra continued. Casey solved complex physics problems in seconds, but she did it through intuitive understanding rather than mathematical calculation. Dr. Corvash leaned forward, his large eyes reflecting the holographic display. You are suggesting that intelligence can exist without conscious reasoning? Not without reasoning, Dr. Lyra corrected, but with a different kind of reasoning. One that our educational system does not recognize or value. Professor Veltarin had been quiet during the presentation, but now she spoke. I have observed Casey in my classes for months. She struggles with theoretical concepts that my people consider basic, yet on that planet she demonstrated mastery of principles I could not calculate so quickly. In the days following the incident, Casey found herself at the center of attention. She never wanted students who had barely acknowledged her existence now approached her with questions and requests for demonstrations. She tried to explain that what she did was not special, just practical, but no one seemed to believe her. Zara Thompson watched her roommate handle the attention with characteristic humility. You realize what this means, Casey? She said one evening as they sat in their shared quarters. You have changed how an entire galaxy thinks about intelligence. Casey was working on her latest assignment, a theoretical paper about energy conservation. She had failed the last 3 attempts, but kept trying. I have not changed anything, she replied. I just did what needed doing. But that is exactly the point. Zara insisted. You solved a problem that none of us could solve. You did it without equations or calculations. You just knew what would work. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at their door. Dr. Lyra entered, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. Casey, I have a proposal for you, she announced. Lyra explained that she wanted Casey to participate in a new series of assessments designed to measure different types of intelligence. Instead of theoretical problems, these tests would involve practical challenges, hands-on problem-solving, and real-world scenarios. The first test took place in the ship's engineering section. Casey was presented with a mechanical puzzle that had stumped the engineering students for weeks. 3 interlocking systems that needed to work together, but the mathematical solution required calculations beyond what most species could perform quickly. Casey studied the mechanism for less than a minute, then began adjusting components. She did not calculate angles or forces, she simply felt how the parts wanted to move, and helped them do it. Within 10 minutes, the puzzle was solved. Dr. Lyra recorded everything, her purple eyes bright with scientific excitement. "How did you know which adjustments to make?" she asked. Casey shrugged. "I could see how the parts were fighting each other. They wanted to work together, but something was stopping them, so I figured out what was stopping them and fixed it." The engineering professor, Dr. Wells, a human who had been skeptical of the new testing approach, watched the recorded solution 3 times. "I have been trying to solve that puzzle for 2 weeks, she said finally. Casey did it by treating the machine like a living thing that needed help more. Tests followed, each one revealing different aspects of Casey's intelligence. That traditional academics had never measured: crisis decision-making under pressure, intuitive understanding of complex systems, pattern recognition through observation rather than analysis. Casey excelled at every practical challenge while still struggling with theoretical coursework. The contradiction fascinated the alien faculty and led to heated debates about the nature of intelligence itself. Professor Velteron called Casey to her office after the latest round of testing. The elegant Etherin looked thoughtful as she reviewed the results. "Casey, your practical scores are among the highest we have ever recorded, yet your theoretical scores remain." Casey nodded, feeling the familiar sting of academic failure. "I know I am not smart enough for the regular program." Professor Velteron set down the tablet and looked directly at Casey with her glowing purple eyes. "That statement reveals a fundamental misunderstanding. Intelligence is not a single thing that you either have or lack. It is many different capabilities working together." She activated a holographic display, showing test results from multiple species. "The Zephyrians excel at memory and logical processing. The Kondurians are masters of collective reasoning. My people, the Etherians, specialize in abstract theoretical thinking. But you, Casey, you possess something we had not recognized as intelligence until now." The display highlighted Casey's scores in practical problem solving. Her results formed a pattern, unlike anything in the alien database: consistently high performance in real-world scenarios, matched with below-average scores in theoretical understanding. You solve problems by understanding them in your body as much as your mind, Professor Velteron explained. "This kinesthetic intelligence allows you to process information that others can only understand through complex calculations." Casey felt something shift inside her chest. For months, she had believed she was failing because she was not smart enough. Now, she was learning that she had been measuring herself against the wrong standards. Dr. Lyra entered the office, carrying official-looking documents. "Casey, we are implementing a new certification track," she announced. "Applied intelligence for students whose strengths lie in practical problem solving rather than theoretical analysis." Casey stared at the documents, hardly believing what she was reading. After months of academic probation, she was being offered a chance to succeed, not by changing how she learned, but by being recognized for how she already learned. The news spread quickly through the research ship. A human who failed every traditional exam was helping to create an entirely new way to measure intelligence. The implications were staggering for educational systems across the galaxy. That evening, Casey stood in the observation deck, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so distant and unwelcoming. Now they looked different, like destinations rather than barriers, like opportunities rather than obstacles. Sarah joined her at the window, looking proud and slightly amazed. "So what now?" she asked. Casey smiled, feeling confident for the first time since arriving on the ship. "Now, I stopped trying to be the kind of smart everyone else expects and start being the kind of smart I actually am behind them." The research ship hummed with activity as alien educators worked late into the night, redesigning curricula and developing new assessment methods, all because a human who failed every exam had shown them that there were more ways to be intelligent than they had ever imagined the stars seemed brighter than Casey remembered. 6 months after the incident on Kepler 44, To Be the New Horizons hosted its first graduation ceremony under the new educational protocols. Casey Miller stood in the preparation chamber, adjusting the ceremonial robes that marked her as a certified graduate in applied intelligence. The robes were the same deep blue worn by all graduating students, regardless of their specialization. Dr. Lyra had insisted on this detail, arguing that different types of intelligence deserved equal recognition. Casey still felt strange wearing them after months of believing she would never graduate at all through the chamber window. Casey could see the main assembly hall filling with students, faculty, and guests from across the galaxy. The ceremony was being broadcast to educational institutions throughout known space, making it one of the most watched academic events in recent history. Ara Thompson entered the chamber wearing her own graduation robes in theoretical linguistics. She had excelled in every traditional subject and would begin advanced studies at the prestigious Etherin Academy. "Can you believe we are actually graduating?" she asked, with a smile. Casey shook her head, still amazed by how much had changed. A year ago she had been failing every exam and considering dropping out of the program. Now she was graduating with honors in a field that had been created partly because of her own abilities. The new applied intelligence track had attracted students from species across the galaxy. It turned out that many individuals struggled with traditional academic measures while excelling at practical problem solving. Crisis management, intuitive engineering, and adaptive thinking were now recognized as valuable forms of intelligence. Dr. Lyra entered the preparation chamber, looking elegant in her faculty robes. The Etherin had become famous for her research on multimodal intelligence assessment. Her papers were required reading at educational institutions throughout the galaxy. "Casey, you should know that your graduation is being watched by representatives from the Galactic Colonial Authority," she announced. "They have been following your progress with great interest." Casey felt a flutter of nervousness. She had heard rumors about job offers and research positions, but had been focusing on graduation rather than future plans. The idea that important people were watching her felt overwhelming. "You have nothing to worry about," Dr. Lyra continued. "Your scores in practical assessments are unprecedented. The way you solved the engineering challenges demonstrated capabilities we are still trying to understand." The graduation ceremony began with traditional music from each represented species. The harmony created by 12 different musical traditions was both beautiful and complex. Professor Velteron took the stage to deliver the opening address. "Today, we celebrate not just the achievements of our graduates, but a fundamental shift in how we understand intelligence itself," she announced in her musical voice. "We have learned that knowledge takes many forms and that wisdom cannot be measured by any single standard." Casey listened from backstage as Professor Velteron described the changes implemented over the past months. New testing methods that measured multiple types of intelligence, practical assessments alongside theoretical ones, recognition that different species and individuals excelled in different ways. The human Casey Miller challenged our assumptions about intelligence. Professor Veltarin continued. "Her struggles with traditional academics led us to discover forms of intelligence we had never recognized. The result is an educational system that serves all students better." When Casey's name was called, she walked onto the stage feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. The audience included not just her fellow students, but distinguished guests from across the galaxy, representatives from universities, research institutions, and government agencies. Dr. Lyra stepped forward to present Casey's certification in applied intelligence. "This student demonstrated that intelligence cannot be confined to traditional measurements," she announced. Casey Miller redefined excellence by showing us that practical wisdom is as valuable as theoretical knowledge. Casey accepted the certificate, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. The document represented months of practical assessments, hands-on problem-solving, and real-world applications. She had excelled in areas that measured her actual abilities, rather than forcing her to fit someone else's definition of intelligence. After the ceremony, Casey was approached by several representatives offering positions and opportunities. The colonial authority wanted her for their emergency response teams. Engineering corps were interested in her intuitive problem-solving abilities. Research institutions offered positions studying practical applications of theoretical concepts, but the offer that interested Casey most came from an unexpected source: Captain Sarah Martinez, a human officer with the Deep Space Exploration Service, approached her with a proposal. "We are putting together a team for long-range exploration missions, Captain," Martinez explained. "Your ability to solve practical problems under pressure would be invaluable for establishing colonies on new worlds." Casey thought about the offer. The idea of using her abilities to help humans and other species expand into unknown territories appealed to her. It would be challenging work that required exactly the kind of intelligence she possessed. "I am interested," Casey replied, "but I want to finish my advanced certification first." The new Applied Intelligence program offered additional training in crisis management, adaptive engineering, and cross-species communication. Captain Martinez smiled. "That shows wisdom. We will have a position waiting when you are ready." Later that evening, Casey stood once again in the observation deck, looking out at the stars, but now instead of feeling lost and inadequate, she felt excited about the possibilities ahead. The same stars that had once seemed like barriers now looked like destinations. Zara joined her carrying 2 cups of synthetic coffee. "So what now?" she asked. Casey sipped her coffee and considered the question. "Now I get to do what I have always been good at, solving practical problems and helping people. The only difference is that now everyone understands that those abilities matter." Lyra approached them carrying a tablet with the latest research data. "Casey, your test results have become the foundation for intelligence assessment reforms across the galaxy," she announced. "Students who would have been considered failures under the old system are now recognized for their unique capabilities." Casey felt a warm sense of satisfaction, knowing that other students would not have to go through the self-doubt and frustration she had experienced. The new system would identify and nurture different types of intelligence, instead of forcing everyone into the same narrow definition. "You know what the most important thing is, Dr. Lyra," continued. Casey shook her head, curious to hear the answer. "You never stopped trying, even when every test said you were failing. You kept working, kept believing you had something to contribute. That determination is perhaps the most important intelligence of Alcasi." Looked out at the stars, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From academic failure to graduation with honors, from feeling worthless to helping reshape education across the galaxy, from believing she was not smart enough to realizing she was smart in ways no one had recognized. The research ship New Horizons continued its mission, carrying students and faculty from dozens of species. But now it carried something else as well. A new understanding that intelligence was not a single thing to be measured by standardized tests, but a diverse collection of abilities that different individuals possessed in different combinations. Casey Miller had failed every traditional exam, but she had passed the most important test of all. She had proven that there were many ways to be intelligent, and that practical wisdom was just as valuable as theoretical knowledge. Her journey from academic failure to recognized expert had changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless students across the galaxies. The ship traveled between the stars. Casey felt grateful for the failures that had led to this success. Without struggling with traditional academics, she never would have discovered her true strengths. Without facing the possibility of dropping out, she never would have been motivated to prove herself in new ways. The stars that had once seemed distant and unwelcoming now felt like home. Casey Miller had found her place in the galaxy, not by conforming to others' expectations, but by being authentically herself. The human who failed every exam had taught the galaxy that success could not be measured by any single standard. She had redefined excellence by refusing to accept that she was not excellent enough.